On today's show, how James Harden is finally finding a groove with Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and the LA Clippers. After a rough start to the Big Four era, they've now won 8 of their last 11 games. Russell Westbrook making the sacrifice to move to the bench unit. Is his production enough, and is he content in that role coming off the bench for the Clippers? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you just pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is so simple to play. You can make your picks and submit an entry in less than 60 seconds. They've got quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types, which is what makes Prize Picks the #1 DFS app on the market. And with basketball season in full swing, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you can do LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus reception. So if you've been thinking about getting into daily fantasy sports, you've got to give Prize Picks a chance. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA with promo code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. And joining us now is the host of Locked On Clippers, Darian Vaziri, who can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts, and on YouTube, just search Locked On Clippers. And Darian, it kind of feels like the Clippers are maybe finding their groove a little bit here. Things were a little rough early on, in the immediate aftermath of the start of the Big Four era, right? They had that 6-game losing streak trying to make things work with the, Russ, Harden, Kawhi, and PG all in the starting lineup together. Then Russell Westbrook makes the sacrifice play, whatever, moves to the bench. And since that point, they've gone 8-3, including 4-1 in their last 5. So what has that new starting lineup with Terrence Mann plugged in there instead of Russ allowed the Clippers to do differently in order to kind of turn things around after a bit of that rough start?
It does 2 things. One, it lets you have Terrence Mann guard the opposing team's best players, so you at least take that burden off of Kawhi or Paul George. So that's what he's on this team to do. That's why they were resistant to trade him, is they want Terrence to guard whoever the other team's best player is. Now, not saying he's a lockdown defender by any stretch, but he's good and he's going to work hard, which will help out Kawhi and Paul George on that end. And then offensively, it doesn't have it allows for it not to be as clunky in the sense that you don't have everyone just deferring to each other. Now the roles are very laid out simply. Kawhi's the man, Paul George is basically, the 1B kind of thing, and James Harden is the primary ball handler, playmaker. He has the ball in his hands the most. So not having to balance that Russell Westbrook and James Harden both want to play point guard thing, and having a guy like Terrence who's just going to do the little things, that makes it so that you go from now an awkward Big Four to a Big Three that fits pretty well together. And you're starting to see more of what, the role that James Harden played in Brooklyn. And I saw a stat the other day. He's already played as many games with Kawhi and Paul George as he did with Kyrie and KD all together. And I think that's including the playoffs. So it's starting to come together, and the defense has really stepped up. Ivica Zubac being a huge reason for that.
That's such an embarrassing stat when you think about just what that trade cost them, and the fact that Big Three was never able to really put it together. Adversity, I don't know. That's not the right word for it. It's just, they dealt with a lot. But Harden over these last 5 games is up to, rough start for Harden. He said it himself at one point that he wasn't quite in, James Harden shape, didn't have a training camp, and we're all looking around like, who's the guy whose fault this is? But it is what it is. He's up to, over these last 5 games, 19, 4, and 8 on 49% shooting from the floor. He's shooting 47% from 3. How are you kind of seeing him settle into this new role with the Clippers? Because I know early on one of the issues, right, is he was over deferring, right? He was being too kind of complacent in deferring to guys like Kawhi, like PG, or even Russ at times when they were still starting together. How are you seeing him kind of settle into this role now?
Well, his pick and roll chemistry with Ivica Zubac is picking up for sure. I mean, one thing we know is James Harden is one of the best pick and roll players I in the league has ever seen. His pocket passing is fantastic. His lob passing is really good. I think he's a better passer than Westbrook, even though they're both great passers. I think Harden throws a more wide variety of passes, and I'm a little bit less nervous about the turnover thing with Harden. The second way he settled in my opinion, is becoming more comfortable shooting the catch and shoot three. That was one thing that you saw, even though he shot it at a good percentage, he would be a little resistant to shoot it sometimes right off the catch. And with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they're going to get double teamed in the post. They're going to get loaded up on. There's going to be opportunities for James Harden to let it fly right off the catch. And I think he's been doing that better over the last. It started after the Denver loss. We lost to the Nuggets without Jokic, Murray, and Aaron Gordon. And after that, they were like, okay, James, you got to start being more aggressive shooting the ball. And it was 3 straight, I believe, double-digit shot attempt games from Harden. And it started with that Sacramento game, which I believe was his best game as a Clipper so far in Sacramento, where we beat them handedly. And he started out by letting it fly on the catch and shoot three, and it opened up everything for him offensively. So when Harden's in that pick and roll, he needs to look to score first and then make the defense react and then make the reads off of that. And that's what he was in Houston for so many years, as you know more than anyone. So it's about keeping the defense honest. And I think you still want to have James Harden look to score in those pick and roll situations as well. And when he has weaker defenders on him, because think about it, he's probably getting the third best defender that a team can go put on him, because they're going to put options 1 and 2 on Kawhi and Paul. So that can open it up for Harden to be even more effective offensively.
Yeah. And look, Harden's not the same, he's not MVP level James Harden that he was here in Houston, but if a team can only afford to put their third best defender on him, that's still more or less barbecue chicken, even for current day James Harden to carve somebody up. I will say, man, the whole catch and shoot thing with James is so crazy, because it's like a weird mental thing for him, where he held on to that habit, well after his tenure here in Houston. But it was always a thing where, he dribbled the ball so much, and he's such a rhythm guy, right? He had that lullaby dribble where he likes to, lull the defender to sleep and then get to the step back, that he would get back, even back when he played with Chris Paul here in Houston, he would get some wide open looks. And it's almost like he needed to take like a rhythm dribble or like a rhythm step back to be able to hit those shots. And so, but that can sometimes cost you, right? If you only have a split second to get the shot off before a defender closes out on you, you'll have some possessions where if you sacrifice that split second for a dribble or to get your rhythm, then you lose the opportunity to actually take the shot. So that is an important note for him to have to be able to hit those shots, especially if Kawhi and PG are generating them. But on the flip side here, Darian, so you've got James Harden, he's thriving in this new role. Russell Westbrook was the guy who made the sacrifice play, moved to the bench. And this was after, right? He was promised a big role on this Clippers team, promised the starting spot. Since moving to the bench, Russ's averages are, let's just say they're not great. He's averaging 9 points, 6 boards, and 4 assists, under 40% shooting from the floor, and only 22% from 3. How can Russ manage to find success in this new role? Because it kind of feels like it sucks, right? Like he's the guy who was promised all these things, and he makes the sacrifice for this Clippers team to be able to be the best version of itself. And now maybe he's struggling in this new role.
Jackson, it's kind of interesting because you said those stats, and I'm actually surprised how bad they really are, because it doesn't feel like he's playing that bad. Every Clipper fan seems to be satisfied with the way Westbrook is playing for the most part in this bench role, but it's hard for him. Westbrook is a guy who, even though he's not the best scorer in the world, I mean, in his prime, he still won a couple scoring titles, but he's usually doing that on high volume, right? Like he's getting himself into rhythm with knowing that he can miss a couple of shots and he's going to get a couple more chances to shoot those shots. And the thing about Russ is the fit with Harden at this stage of their careers, especially with Kawhi and Paul, is so bad to the point where they're starting to do this thing where they're not even playing them together at all. So think about it. If you have James Harden starting, he's getting around 30 minutes a game. That only leaves 18 maximum minutes if you're separating them like that for Russ to play. So when he's playing under 20 minutes, he's not going to have those big statistical nights. But what he is bringing is that energy, a little bit of pace off the bench. He's had some highlight blocks, huge rebounds. So it looks like Russell Westbrook's role going forward is going to be as a secondary playmaker off the bench. That's an energy guy more than anything, like literally like an Energizer Bunny guy. And I wouldn't expect him to have big scoring nights or anything like that, or even really close games. And there's a lot of Russell Westbrook fans that are really disappointed about this. They're saying they want him traded, they want him bought out, all this. But it all comes down to this at the end of the day. Does Russell Westbrook want to win a championship by any means? Or does he want to get 30 minutes, 20 minutes, and just have fun to end his career by playing the way he's always played? Because I feel genuinely sorry for the guy, because it's different if he was playing poorly and then got put on the bench for Harden. But he had the highest net rating through a couple of games with Kawhi and Paul, and he only started 9 games with them last year, 10 games actually. The 10th game was the one Paul got hurt last season with those two. So his sample size is really not that big. And he got replaced because the front office didn't really trust him in that role and wanted to bring in an improvement in their eyes, which is Harden. So it comes down to how happy Russ is. My body language, observation so far is, for the most part, it's been good. If you know anything about Russell Westbrook, and I know you do, you had him on your team for a year. If he feels like he's playing well, he's going to be all smiles and he's going to be the most lively person in the arena. And if he feels like he's playing bad, you can tell he's not a guy that can hide his emotions very well. He's a very wears heart on his sleeve kind of person, as am I. And so I relate to him in that way. But yeah, right now it's going okay. The question is, you go into February, March, a couple more months. Is Russell Westbrook okay with playing less than 20 minutes every game? That will remain to be seen.
How will James Harden and the Clippers continue to gel with this new era? Not quite a Big Four era anymore, I guess. And will Russell Westbrook continue to be content with his role coming off the bench, that super sub off the bench? You'll have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Clippers. Darian, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Anytime, and it still feels like a Big Four. I'll just tell you that.